Hey, welcome back. Okay, so the last video was about the writing process, and I want to give you just a quick down and dirty guide to rhetoric right now. So we'll be talking about rhetoric throughout the rest of this semester a lot, but just to get things going, I want to give you just sort of the foundation of rhetoric. So rhetoric, there's a lot of ways to define it, but I really like to call it the craft of a convincing argument. Technically, rhetoric is the craft of any argument, but we're going for a convincing argument, right? So the craft of a convincing argument, which tells us that rhetoric is not just something that exists, it's intentional, right? We put things together intentionally. As a sort of side note, I want you to know that the way we use the word argument often in English classes does not mean like fighting, right? An argument is just, it's your stance on things. It's whatever you're trying to prove. So your argument could be proving why a movie is so great, right? It doesn't have to be like really controversial or anything. An argument is simply just something that has multiple perspectives, and your perspective essentially is your argument. Okay, so I hope that's clear. I just don't want you to think that when I say argument, I mean like fighting, debate sort of stuff. So rhetoric, the craft of creating a convincing argument. Rhetoric was developed many moons ago. We really attribute rhetoric as we use it in the West to Aristotle. So it's kind of cool that we're still using Aristotle's teachings today. As a yogi, the lineage of teachings is really important. So I think it's really cool that we are still in Aristotle's lineage. So right now, I really want to talk about just the main components of rhetoric. Almost said the main components of yoga, but that's not what we're doing. The main components of rhetoric. So first and foremost, when we are trying to create a convincing argument, there are two things we have to think about. One, audience. If you do not know who you're writing for, nothing will work out. It just won't. You must know your audience. This is true with anything, right? If you're in the hospital and you're treating a 40-year-old patient, you wouldn't talk to that patient as if he or she were a 6-year-old. Oh, are you feeling really, really bad? You want a cookie? Right? That's not knowing your audience. We've all met people who talk to us as if we are someone else, right? Or part of a different age group or something like that. It doesn't feel good. It definitely shows that you're not, or that person is not paying attention. So number one, you have to know your audience. Number two, you have to know your purpose. What are you doing and why? What is the whole point of this? So it's really critical to know what you're supposed to do, because if you're really supposed to be writing to convince someone, you need to know that. So that way you can use convincing language, right? Let's say that you don't understand your purpose, and your purpose is just to explain a neutral argument, right? Maybe just to detail something, and suddenly you're trying to persuade. That's like not cool. Think about that in regular life. If you're just having a conversation, even if it's about politics and you're just trying to explain like something that happened on the news, and suddenly the person that you're talking to doesn't follow, and there's like all of a sudden trying to convince you of something, the purpose has been lost, right? So we want to make sure that we're always understanding the audience and the purpose. Now, you can't control what other people do with the purpose, but within your own writing, you must know what you are supposed to do. The great news is about this class, you can ask me, and I'll tell you. Okay. So audience and purpose will determine everything else about your writing. So your audience and purpose will determine your diction. Diction is just a word for your language. The words you use will matter depending on who you're writing for and why. You would not use, let's say, like graduate readiness words, GRE words, say for a middle school audience. That wouldn't make any sense. You wouldn't talk to them like they're scholars because they're children. And you wouldn't use childish language to talk to, say, your professor because that's your professor, right? So our audience decides how we speak to people. And then the purpose also decides this, because if our purpose is to convince, that means our language will be maybe a little more emotional or charged in some sort of appropriate way. If our purpose is to be just neutral and again just describe, say, an object, let's say you're just describing, say, this pink notebook, you're not going to use very charged language, right? So the audience and purpose decide what sort of words you're going to use. And it's really important to be aware of your audience and purpose so that you can use those right words, because it doesn't feel good when your audience is lost, when they don't understand what you're saying, or you're insulting them by talking down to them, right? Okay, and now what makes this a little bit more complicated is that our audience and purpose determines our diction determines our tone. So the words that we use craft the tone. So tone is just the mood of something. So if we're using really charged and emotional words, our tone will be emotional, right? If we're using really happy words, our tone will be really happy. So it's important to understand that the words we use matter, not just in the sense that like it makes you look smart or it doesn't make you look smart, but it sets the mood for things. We've all had conversations with people where the word they use had a really specific tone. And if it wasn't appropriate in that context, it usually is very frustrating. Audience, purpose. So we have those two up here broad. Diction, a little bit more narrow. Tone, a little bit more narrow. Your audience and purpose will also determine your genre, especially your purpose. So genre is like a category or a type. So if your purpose is to analyze something, you're going to write an analysis paper. If your purpose is to convince, you're going to write an argument-based paper. If your audience, say, is, I don't know, a board of doctors at the hospital or something, you know that your audience will want a specific genre. They're going to want a research-based genre, right? So, audience and purpose, they also determine what type of writing we do. They also determine the medium, which is really the place in which we publish our writing. So if you're writing, say, for a group of freshman college students, you're probably not going to reach them by publishing your work in an academic journal, but you will catch them on social media or a blog, right? Or if you're writing for, say, a group of professors, you're more likely to catch them in, say, a blog, maybe, depending on what type of blog it is, but definitely in, say, academic journals or those sorts of publications. So our audience also determines where we should put our work. We'll talk more about this as the semester goes, and you'll have some activities and exercises that will help you put this into a little bit more context. I don't want to spend too much time talking about it because this is sort of an organic thing that you'll develop through your own writing. But if there's anything you take away from this, I want you to know that audience and purpose are the first things you must understand. And then from every word, piece of punctuation, every sentence that you write, you must reassess. Does this suit my audience? Does this meet my purpose? Does this piece of research appeal to my audience? Will it turn them off? Does this piece of research support my purpose? Does using this word appeal to my audience? Does using this word fit within the context of my purpose? It's really important for you to start looking at not just your whole piece of writing, but the individual parts, right? That's critical. That is when you start getting into the craft of your convincing argument. So it's not just you arguing, you're crafting something really specific and hopefully really convincing. And that's how we use rhetoric. We use it as a way to create our argument, not through just like writing stuff really fast, but to think about it as the little parts that come together as a whole. Right? It's pretty amazing in some ways when you start thinking about like what we can do with our words when we really stop and slow down and think about what we're saying and how we can become really convincing. I don't mean manipulative. I just mean convincing. And when we're able to find that sort of craft within our argument, it becomes pretty empowering within our own lives to be able to articulate what we feel and why. That's really an amazing thing. So we can say like, hey, this is my stance on this. It doesn't even have to be anything super controversial. You can just say like, this is how I feel about this and let me tell you why. And that is super empowering. It creates a lot of clarity within so you understand your own thought process. And it also makes your listener listen, right? That's really cool. Okay, enough of the motivational speaking. I gotta go. You've gotta go. You have work to do. I will see you soon.